This is a reading from the Imitation of Christ by Thomas à Kempis, Chapter 32, on self-denial and renunciation of our desires. Christ, my Son, complete self-denial is the only road to perfect liberty. Those who are obsessed by self-interest and self-love are slaves of their own desires. Timothy, chapter 3, verse 2. They are greedy, inquisitive, and discontented. They spend themselves in pleasures, but never in the service of Jesus Christ, their whole interest being in passing affairs, but all that is not of God shall perish utterly. Observe this simple counsel of perfection. Forsake all, and you shall find all. Renounce desire, and you shall find peace. Give this due thought, and when you have put it into practice, you will understand all things. The disciple, Lord, this is not the work of a single day, and no easy matter. These few words contain the whole way of spiritual perfection. Christ, my Son, do not be discouraged or diverted from your purpose at hearing of this way of perfection. Rather, let it spur you to higher things, and at least to set your hearts on them. If only you would do this and attain that state where you cease to be a lover of self, and stand ready to do my will, and his whom I have appointed as your Father, you would greatly please me, and your whole life would be filled with joy and peace. You have still many things to renounce, and unless you surrender them to me without reserve, you cannot obtain what you ask of me. I counsel you to buy from me gold, refined in the fire, that you may be rich. Revelations chapter 3, verse 18. In that heavenly wisdom that rejects all worthless things, despise the wisdom of the world and every temptation to please others or yourself. I have said, exchange what men consider desirable and honorable for that which they hold in low esteem. For true heavenly wisdom, having no exalted opinion of itself, seeks no recognition from the world. Romans chapter 12, verse 16, is almost disregarded by men and seems to them useless and of no importance. Many pay it lip service, but it plays no part in their lives. Yet this is the precious pearl that remains hidden from many. Matthew chapter 13, verse 46. Chapter 33, on inconstancy of heart. Christ, my Son, do not trust your affections, for they are changeable and inconstant. All your life you are subject to change, even against your inclination. Romans chapter 8, verse 20. At one time you are cheerful, at another sad, now peaceful, now troubled, now full of devotion, now wholly lacking it, now zealous, now slothful, now grave, now gay. But the wise man, who is well versed in spiritual matters, stands above these changing emotions. He pays small regard to his momentary feelings and whims, but directs all the powers of his mind towards the right and true end. Thus, having fixed his gaze and kept his intention constantly on me, he can remain single in purpose and unshaken under all circumstances. The more single his purpose, Matthew chapter 6, verse 22, the more steadily will a man pass through all the storms of life. But in many, this single purpose becomes obscured, for men pay ready attention to any pleasant thing that comes their way, and it is a rare thing to find anyone wholly free from the sin of self-interest. Thus the Jews once came out to Bethany, to Martha and Mary, not for Jesus' sake only, but to see Lazarus. John chapter 12, verse 9. Therefore, make your intention pure, single, and upright, that it may be directed to me alone, without hindrance. Chapter 34, on God's graciousness to those who love him. The disciple, O my God and my all. 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verse 28, and John chapter 20, verse 28. What more can I possess? What greater joy can I desire? Word of sweetness and delight to all who love the word better than the world and its treasures. My God and my all. To the wise these words suffice, and he who loves you will delight to repeat them again and again. When you are present, all is joy. When you are absent, all is gloom. You bring rest to the heart, true peace, and true gladness. You cause us to think well of all and to praise you in all, for nothing can give us lasting joy without you. Whoever knows your joys will find joy in all things, but whoever knows nothing of your joys will find no joy in anything. Those who are worldly wise and sensual-minded lack your wisdom, for in the world lurks much vanity, and in the flesh death. Romans chapter 8, verse 5. Those who follow you by despising worldly things and mortifying their bodily desires are truly wise. They abandon illusion for truth. They forsake the flesh for the spirit. These have their delight in God alone, and whatever good they discover in creatures, they ascribe wholly to the glory of their Maker. But how vast is the difference between enjoyment of the Creator and enjoyment of His creation, between things of eternity and those of time, between light uncreated and light created. A prayer for light. O light everlasting, surpassing all created light. Psalm chapter 27, verse 1, and John chapter 8, verse 12. Pour forth from heaven the glorious rays of your light, and pierce the very depths of my heart. Purify, gladden, light, and quicken the powers of my spirit, that it may hold to you with joy unspeakable. Oh, when shall come that blessed and longed-for hour, when you will fill me with your presence, and be to me all in all? 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verse 28. Until you grant this, I can know no fullness of joy. As yet, alas, my lower nature is strong within me. It is not yet wholly crucified, nor entirely dead. Romans chapter 6, verse 6. It still fights strongly against the Spirit, stirring up conflicts within me, and will not allow the kingdom of the soul to remain at peace. O Christ, who rules the power of the sea and quells its raging waves. Psalm 84, verse 9. Come near and help me. Scatter the nations that delight in war. Psalm 78, verse 30. And overcome them in your strength. Psalm 60, verse 12. Display your might, your mighty power, I pray, and show yourself in might, glorious in might. I have no hope nor refuge. Psalm 31, verse 2. But in you, O Lord my God. Chapter 35. How there is no security from temptation. Christ, my son, there is no security from temptations in this life. As long as you live, you will need spiritual weapons. Your road lies among enemies, and you are liable to attack from every quarter. Unless you carry the shield of patience, Ephesians chapter 6, verse 2, you will not long remain unwounded. And unless you fix your heart on me, with a firm resolve to suffer gladly for my sake, you will not endure the heat of battle, nor win the crown of the saints. Bear all things manfully, and strike lustily at your enemies, for the bread of heaven is the reward of the victor. Revelations chapter 2, verse 17. And the slothful is left in unutterable wretchedness. If you look for rest in this life, how can you attain eternal rest? Dispose yourself not to rest, but to patient endurance. Seek true peace, not on earth, but in heaven, not in man, nor in any other creature, but in God alone. For love of God cheerfully endures everything: labor, sorrow, temptation, provocation, anxiety, necessity, weakness, injury and insult, censure, humiliation, disgrace, contradiction, and contempt. All these things foster your growth in virtue, for they test the unproved servant of Christ, and form the jewels of his heavenly crown. I will grant an eternal reward for your brief toil, and boundless glory for your passing trouble. Do you imagine that you can always have spiritual joys at will? My saints did not, but had many troubles, countless trials, and great desolation of soul. But they patiently endured all these things, and trusted in God rather than themselves, knowing that the sufferings of this present time are not worthy to be compared with the glory to be won hereafter. Romans chapter 8, verse 18. Do you wish to enjoy immediately what many others have only won after much sorrow and struggle? Wait for the Lord. Fight manfully and with high courage. Psalm chapter 27, verse 14. Do not despair. Do not desert your post, but steadfastly devote yourself, body and soul, to the glory of God. I will give you a rich reward. Matthew chapter 16, verse 27. and will be with you in all your troubles. Psalm 91, verse 15. Against the vain judgments of men. Chapter 36. Christ. My son, trust in God with all your heart. If your conscience bears witness to your devotion and innocence, you need not fear the judgments of men. It is a good and holy thing to suffer in this way, and it will not be a burden to the humble heart that trusts in God rather than itself. Many people talk too much, and little attention should be paid them. Moreover, it is quite impossible to please everyone. Although St. Paul endeavored to be pleasing to all men in the Lord, 1 Corinthians chapter 9, verse 22, and became all things to all men, yet he cared very little what they thought of himself. 1 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 3. He did whatever lay in his power to bring instruction and salvation to others, but even he could not escape being misjudged and despised by others. Accordingly, he trusted himself wholly to God, who knows all things, and opposed the shield of patience and humility to the unjust accusations, empty lies, and vain boasts of his detractors. Notwithstanding, sometimes he replied to them, lest his silence should give scandal to the weak. Acts chapter 26, verse 1. Phil chapter 1, verse 14. Why should you fear, mortal man? Isaiah 51, verse 12. Today he is here, tomorrow he is gone forever. Fear God, and you need never fear man. What real harm can the words or actions of any man do you? He injures himself rather than you, and he cannot escape the judgment of God, wherever he be. Keep God always before you, and do not engage in bitter controversies. Even if for the present you seem to suffer defeat and undeserved disgrace, do not complain nor lessen your due reward through impatience. Hebrews chapter 12, verse 1. Instead, raise your eyes to me in heaven, for I have power to deliver you from all shame and wrong, and to reward every man according to his merits. Romans chapter 2, verse 6.